Okay, so I missed the first wave of hype around Puss in Boots when it came out in theaters because I just didn't get around to seeing it, but now it's out on Netflix, so now it's like kind of a second lower wave of hype that I get to experience. And also half of my audience seems to still kind of be interested in it, so it kind of seems like the perfect time to talk about it. Oh, and also I essentially got the idea to do Puss in Boots in the first place because there was one comment on the Spider-Man 2099 video where they essentially brung up other shows and movies that had outrageously amazing villains. And the other ones they brought up was essentially Arcane and of course Puss in Boots. So, that kind of explains why I've been making the content I've been making on my channel. So yeah, if you guys ever really want to see me talk about something, then just comment about it down in the comments because I do look at those and I do draw inspiration from those. Okay, but enough with the intro, let's actually talk about this movie. If I'm being completely honest with myself, I don't think this movie was that good. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. A little overrated, but not too overrated because when it comes to the animation, I think the animation team knew exactly what they were doing. I knew that they knew the assignment. I thought it was amazing. I think the themes are amazing, but I think there was just too many characters bogging everything down. And there was only genuinely one character in this entire movie who essentially held the entire story on their back. But before we talk about him, we kind of have to talk about the character who defies his very existence.
Fear me if you dare.
Puss is an anthropomorphic talking cat who is essentially an adventurer / legend who laughs in the face of death. He's also a parody of Zorro, not the One Piece one, but the other guy, the one that Batman really likes. They've got the same outfits, the same fighting style, they've got the love interest who's just as skilled as them, if not more. Also, they're played by the same exact person, but that's besides the point. The thing that you fully need to understand about Puss is the fact that he's a fearless legend who will never die. Or at least that's what he thinks until one of his most recent battles.
Okay, one more number. I call this one, The Legend Will Never Die.
Puss finds out that this was his 8th death, and obviously cats only have 9 lives, so this shakes him to his very core. He's essentially at the end of his own existence. And for the second time in his life, he's feeling genuine fear. The first time was when he had to essentially go and get married, so he kind of just ran away, but I don't blame him for that one. For Puss, being told that he only has 1 life left is essentially like for a normal person being told that they only have a few years to live. There's not really much you can do to prepare for that. For most people, death just comes at you before you're ever really even ready for it, and this movie kind of just represents that so perfectly because the literal embodiment of death continuously pops out of nowhere when no one is ready for it. Not any character, not any member of the audience. It's just there, always looming over you. And if we're talking about the literal sense of this character, I have to say that he is genuinely just the perfect foil. He's just as charming as Puss. He has the same air around him as if he too was just undefeatable. He just screams badass just like Puss screams badass. And every time he appears on screen is basically the only time where I genuinely get invested into this movie. But unfortunately, he is not in every scene. Even if you took the entire screen time that he has in this movie, it doesn't even add up to a full 7 minutes. But I guess that's kind of just how death is, It's not something that's always in the back of our mind, it's not something that's always surrounded in our life, but every once in a while, when you least expect it, it pops up in some way, shape, or form. It's even like that in the movie where there's just so many comedic, goofy deaths just surrounding so many different characters. And it's all just kind of played for laughs because it kind of just is what it is. You can't just dwell on it for too long. It just happens and you kind of just have to move on. This is what Puss has to deal with throughout the entire movie. In the first fight, Death actually ends up cutting Puss and that makes his entire life flash before his eyes. Death even gives him the chance to, just fight and protect himself and try to face his fears, but Puss just chooses to run away from the inevitable. After this, Puss essentially goes into hiding with a bunch of other cats who can't even talk. He trades in his exciting, adventurous life for one of mediocrity, and he can't even eat a good meal or use the bathroom in private anymore. This parallels reality in some ways. Some people get too scared when they know that they might fail, or they just may be overly cautious. Like, for example, someone who may not want to travel just because they think that the plane will crash or something. You know, people usually don't want to change too much if they think that their entire status quo will end. Eventually though, he meets a dog without a real proper name because he was never really given one by his owner since he was abandoned.
What's your name? Oh, I've been called all kinds of things. Dog, bad dog, stupid dog. Hey you there, get out. Rat face, butt nugget, for brains, you know, that sort of thing.
This dog goes to the same exact place that Puss is at, and he pretends to be a cat so he can have like an actual place to stay. And when he finds Puss, he wants to be like best friends with him, despite Puss absolutely hating everything about this dog. And he's the complete opposite of Puss. He's super happy, he's super nice, he still has ambitions, and it makes him like a pretty interesting character in comparison. Eventually, their travels lead them through a literal pocket full of posies, and I know that I'm kind of like skipping a lot of the plot here, but trust me, you're not missing too much. But yeah, these flowers are alive and blocking their way, and Puss's first instinct is to go and fight these things. Him and Kitty Softpaws use their weapons in order to fight them and slice them up, but you know, every time you cut off one head, two more grow in its place, and they basically can't get past. But Perrito is, that's basically his name now, and also sorry if I'm butchering that, I'm not fluent in Spanish. But Perrito essentially stops and smells the roses, and when he does do that, the roses just let him pass. And Puss and Kitty Softpaws do the same thing, and they say that it's stupid, it's corny, it's lame, and those are the same exact thoughts that I had when I first saw the scene. I thought that it was a super corny metaphor of the whole stop and smell the roses thing, but at the same time, since you know Puss and Kitty Softpaw actually say the same exact thing, it made me realize that this is supposed to be very purposeful. It's supposed to kind of be pretty lame, but in a very meta way. They knew it was a pretty corny way to portray the fact that some people just need to calm down and just enjoy life while they're living it and while they still have it. And essentially, that's just the way they wanted to portray it, regardless of how corny it was. So I gotta give them some respect for that. Also, this is a kids movie, so they kind of do need to be on the nose about it. Also, this scene's probably here just to develop Perrito a little bit more and distinguish him from the rest of the characters. You see, there's this whole MacGuffin in the movie that's called like the last shooting star, and it will give whoever finds it like the last wish.
He said it!
And Puss wants to find it so that he can wish for his 9 lives back, and Perrito is just there for the ride. And the first thing that they do is essentially go and find a map that can lead them to the shooting star. The thing is, the map only responds to touch. Every single time a different person touches the map changes. When Puss touches it, it only shows them places that have to do with death and despair. When Kitty touches it, it only shows places that have to do with her loneliness and her depression. And when Perrito touches it, it essentially only shows paths that are like super duper easy and fun, which it's supposed to show his character even more because of the fact that he's the only character who seems to be actually genuinely happy and content with his life. And with Perrito, he seems to only ever want everyone else around him to be happy, rather even if they're like enemies of his, he just wants them to all be happy, which goes really well in hand with his whole entire goal of wanting to be a support dog. And I just absolutely love that one little scene where like Puss is like freaking out and Perrito goes to calm him down by being his support dog for a hot second. And I thought it was just so wholesome, and I genuinely just love that one little scene. Alright, but now it's time for us to talk about one of the most spookiest parts of this entire movie. The Cave of Lost Souls! I'm sorry if I scared like the living shit out of you. The scene wasn't even that scary, Puss was vibing the whole time. Puss gets stuck in a cave that has his last 8 souls, just all sitting there vibing and chilling, and he looks at them and he realizes that he kind of misses all those lives, and they convince him to stay there and talk and joke around for a while, even though his friends are in danger and he needs to go back to them. But he makes some time for them. Eventually he does actually gain some sense and he realizes he needs to go and help his friends. But when he says this to his other 8 lives, they essentially tell him that he doesn't really need them. They say that he needs to go and make the wish so he can get his 9 lives back. And this sounds like a decent idea at first until he like realizes and he thinks back on his life and he realizes that he was always alone and he was like a selfish jerk back then, and he feels a lot better in his new life where he has like all his friends by his side. So for a split second he actually does decide to go back and help his friends until of course death arrives. And this definitely leads to one of the coolest parts in the movie because this entire time Puss just thought this guy was just some random bounty hunter, but then he realizes that he's actually Death. He decides to introduce himself and tells him that he's literally death. This isn't a metaphor or anything. He genuinely is just death trying to claim his life.
And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically or poetically or theoretically or in any other fancy way. I'm death, straight up.
And we also find out his motives. We find out that he's not even supposed to be going after Puss yet because Puss is still alive. Death doesn't really care though, because he thinks the fact that Puss has 9 lives is actually just simply absurd. And also he hates the fact that Puss has never appreciated a single one of his lives. And now, after realizing that he's going up against a seemingly inevitable force, he just decides to run. He just shows that he truly is a coward, and he just stops caring about his friends right then and there. It reminds me of that, like, the whole, like, speech that Joker gave about, like, oh, when a person is faced with death, you see their true colors, or some, I'm probably, like, butchering the quote, but, you know, it was something like that. And Puss here genuinely shows his true colors. He shows that he'll literally just throw his friends under the bus because he can't live with the fact that he won't live forever. So once again, he runs off and abandons everyone. Near the end of the movie, Death finally catches up to Puss and just pushes him into a corner of literal fire. And he gives him 2 choices. He can either run and make his wish so that he can get his 9 lives back and he can prolong the entire cat and mouse game that they're playing, or he can fight for what he has. I'm pretty conflicted about this decision because, like, I'm not sure how purposeful it is for his own character. Like, I think it's weird that Death, again, is just letting Puss leave, but I'm not sure if it's because he's trying to teach him a lesson. Because it seems like he just genuinely wanted to kill Puss, but in this one moment, it's like he sees potential in him, almost. He wants to see what he will do rather than judge him off of his past. But in the end, I guess it didn't really matter, because in all reality, he would only be satisfied as long as the person that he was after died. And Puss did die, at least the version of Puss that he was looking for died. Puss was arrogant. He was an arrogant little legend who laughed in the face of death, but he wasn't that guy anymore by the end of the movie. So the battle just kind of turns into a draw, and Death just promises to come back for him later. Also, after giving it some thought, I've realized that this movie is not as bad as I initially said at the beginning of the video. I know I'm going to kind of contradict it, but this movie's kind of great. I kind of convinced myself that within this entire, like, monologue of talking about it. My main problem with it is that the characters are like, there's just too many characters. There's too many villains that I just don't care about, and it just slows the story down and just takes away from the characters that we should care about. Like, Perito. At first I thought his character was super annoying, but after watching the entire movie and thinking about it a little bit longer, I realized that he's kind of the heart of the movie. With Kitty Softpaws, I just loved how she just kind of just wanted Puss to just desperately be there for her while not actually saying it. Puss himself is also an interesting character. Obviously he's the main lead, and just everything about him is super cool and interesting, especially his entire conflict that goes on in his head, because it's very realistic. The whole thing's about death. It's just so morbid, it's so real. I love all of that. But yeah, to sum it all up, I just think it had way too many antagonists, and it should have just focused way more on the main cast and Death, and it would have been a little bit better. And right now it's probably got like I'll probably give it like a 3.5 stars. I think that's decent. That's pretty good. Yeah, it was a decent movie. You should watch it if you haven't. And that's all I have to say about it. See ya.